2, 360.
Rose, how have you been? What's going on?
I know.
Now, you guys have been in Europe for how long now?
I know, a year and a half.
Wow. And you guys are like in Paris?
So no, we're outside of Paris in a city called Limoges. It's closer to Bordeaux than it is to Paris. And we love it. And so it was experiment, obviously, at the beginning.
Sure.
Because my dad was a university professor of languages, and he had a Fulbright. So we lived in France here in Limoges when I was a kid. So I was like, I want my kids to learn French. I want to do the same thing, right? And so Aaron and I talked about it, like, what should we do? What languages, right? Because we thought we'd like for them, obviously, to know Spanish, because, you know, Spanish was my first language. And then we thought, well, Chinese. And then I was like, you know what? Let's just go to France, because I know it's a language of the UN. There's great philosophers, great food, right? So I'm just like, let's just start with France. If we're going to live anywhere, and if it's for a 1 year time limit, which is what we set ourselves, let's just do France, and then we could see from there. And so we obviously like it so much that we extended for an extra year. And now the girls are fluent in French.
Oh my, and Spanish.
Yeah. So we don't speak Spanish, unfortunately. I know my mom is like, you know, so upset. But so we're thinking through, you know, like in the next 10 years. So Elia is now 8 and Ristia is 5.5. And we've already thought through, like, when are we going to live in China, and when are we going to live in somewhere where they speak Spanish, right? So we've thought through a lot of this, and how do we want to do it, and probably do like a around the world tour like we did, Aaron and I did alone. We thought, how do we do that with them, and maybe stops in China? Like, we're trying to think through this because we just think it's so important for kids to speak different languages, and I think just to be global citizens. I mean, and you know this, right? And just how to, like, get them in a bigger mindset. People think differently from them. People eat differently from them. They speak differently, you know, all these different things. And so this was our first foray to see how they would react. And I mean, literally the first 3 months were really, really hard. You know, because I did not have the time to teach them anything in French. So we literally went from Tampa to here, and they started school the next week. Like, I gave them it was like throwing them in the deep end without ever seeing water, right? It was so bad. And afterwards I was like, I probably shouldn't have done it this way. But anyway, first 3 months were so bad. It was really, really hard. And I, you know, doubted myself, like, maybe we should just go back. And then I was like, no, let me just stick it through. It's harder for me than for them, you know? And my daughter was crying, you know, she's just like, I don't have any friends. I don't know anything. She didn't know any French. And then literally we clicked after Christmas, and now they're fluent in French. My daughter does her homework, like, she's conjugating, you know, in the future and the past, and doing math in French. And my other daughter, like, it's not an issue, right? She just speaks French all the time, or in English or whatever. She just goes from one to the other. And so it's amazing to see how fast they learn, you know?
Yes,
and so I was like, now I'm like, okay, now I did a good job. Like, great choice, Rose. But at the same time, it wasn't a sure thing when we first started.
Right.
So.
Sure. No, you know, yeah, like, you know, change is just no joke. You know, and the other thing that's fascinating about kids is, you know, we there's this program actually called the Institute for the Advancement of Human Potential.
That's
and
right. Yeah.
This guy he was a neuro something, some neural guy and brain guy. And so, to make it quick, he basically, he was originally a guy who taught kids that had lobotomies how to become normal or be functioning humans in society even after lobotomies. And he thought, well, man, if I can do this with kids with lobotomies, what can I do with normal kids without lobotomies?
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like, you can't teach a kid, like, there's no way to teach a kid too much. Like, you know, where they're like, oh no, I can't handle it. You know, they've studied kids like in you know, African country, like in the middle of Africa, that know 10 languages by the time they're, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and speak them all flawlessly. you
It's
know,
amazing.
yes, it's
So
just,
it's funny, I heard that from you when we last spoke, and I remember Googling that and taking a look at it too. And it led me down the rabbit hole of Carol Dweck and the growth mindset and
yes,
reading. I mean, it's just awesome. And so that unveiled a whole, thing for me. And I absolutely agree with it. Like kids are just um, amazing. But here's the thing. So are adults, right? Like we could do that as well. And people forget that as adults.
that's right.
So you're right. So I'm absolutely a growth mindset person. I do. I mean, I'm very deliberate about teaching them that. Like, I know it's painful right now, but
Yes,
like
yes,
you're gonna learn so much, and you're gonna learn so much from this, and you're gonna, other than when you're 18, you're gonna want to be in Paris. I know you don't like it now, but just like also hey, you could do this, you could do whatever it is afterwards too. So just teaching them, growth mindset, you're gonna learn something new. You could always learn something new if you want to. So I think that's pretty neat as a parent like you, when you're deliberate about it and teaching them
yes. One of the things that for us, our kids been homeschooled for a long time now, and we use
that.
this.
Yep.
It's a classical model. It's called classical conversations. And one of the things that I dig about it is they teach the tools of learning. So, there's something called the 5 core habits that they learn in the grammar phase, which is the first handful of years. And then something called the 5 common topics that happens in the dialectic phase. And these are, the 5 common topics. This is like Aristotle. This is old, 1,000 years old. And then in the rhetoric phase, there's something called the 5 canons of rhetoric. And just learning that there were tools to learn blew my mind, right? And like you said, it doesn't matter what age, but just realizing that we can, as adults, we can learn anything we want to, whenever we want to. We just follow the progression of learning. And there's always, especially like in the grammar phase, there's always tension, right? There's always, even in the dialectic phase, there's always, man, it's awkward, it's uncomfortable. I don't speak French fluently. How do I get through this phase? Well, you just got to keep going
At
through.
it.
Okay,
Right.
Rose, how did you become a rock star? Like,
I'm not.
no, Rose, you are, like, when I think, like, when I watch like the Born Identity series, like I literally, like, I picture you, like you are, I have you in my brain as this, you were just this amazing lady. How did you, like what happened in your childhood that got you on this track of amazing, I don't know, this is amazing trajectory. Like, where did it come from?
Okay. Well, thanks, first of all, for thinking that. So it's interesting. I had, so like the American story, I had 2 parents who were immigrants, right? One, voluntarily, my dad was born in Los Angeles, but from Mexican parents. So they were both older, and my dad was born in 1928. So he's passed away 5 years now, but he's, from a time where he grew up he was a kid during the Great Depression. It was no joke, and in order to get out of the Great Depression, he volunteered in 1945 at 17 years of age to go to World War II, like not knowing it was near the end, obviously. But so he comes from obviously, that mindset. It's, limited resources, you go to war in order to have a better life, so horrible. Then my mom, was a Cuban emigre, and she left Cuba in her 30s with nothing. So you weren't allowed to bring any keepsakes, any family heirlooms, nothing. And she comes from 8 brothers and sisters. Most of them had left: Venezuela, Spain, Florida. One of the 8 stayed, and she ended up, funnily enough, working for Che Guevara when Che Guevara was the economic minister, and she was an economist. But my mom decided, you know what, I'm going to leave Cuba. I'm going to try to get a better life. And then she immigrated to Los Angeles. So this is a long way to say I came from, parents who had a very different mindset because they were sort of living in adversity. And so they were very strict, growing up. And I always remember, no sleepovers, no things like that. I remember I wanted to do gymnastics and basketball. My dad was, no, because you could hurt yourself in gymnastics, and you're a piano player and you could hurt or like mess up your fingers if you play basketball. And I remember just thinking this mindset, like, okay, but I really want to do this sport. And so we settled on tennis. But so all this to say, like, they obviously tried to raise me in what they thought was the best thing for us, for their two daughters, given where they came from, which was, not, 1980, not totally suited for 1980s, 1990s LA. So when I was 17 and I graduated from high school, I'm like, you know what? I want, above all, to have agency over my choices, and I want to go and have an adventurous life, right? So that was my thing. My story was, I want an adventurous life, no matter what. And no one's going to tell me what to do, which is funny because then I went to West Point, right? And so West Point, believe it or not, so I had never heard of West Point, grew up in liberal LA, and no one in my high school. So they filmed the Brady Bunch at my high school. A lot of kids were in the, arts and theater, and parents were in the movie industry. So no one was very, military minded. And so no one had gone to any of the academies before. So I had received a call, can't remember, I guess it was the beginning of my senior year in that summer. And it was because of SAT scores. And the academy was deliberately trying to recruit minorities. And so I get this call from Captain Bond. I mean, I remember to this day, and he said, "Hey, I'm Captain Rich Bond, and I'm calling from United States Military Academy at West Point, and we're trying to recruit people." I'm like, "Okay." I had no idea, So I said, "Okay, so where are you guys located? Are you in Oregon or something?" Because I thought it was West Point. West meant West. So I just thought, okay, I want to get it out of California. That was my thing. I don't want to go to UCLA, Stanford, Berkeley, USC, CSD. It's like, I want out of California. I want something completely different. And then he's like, "No, we're in New York." I'm like, "Oh, okay, New York, that's good." So I was like, that's far enough from LA. That's perfect. And then my second question was, well, how much does it cost to go there? And do you guys give scholarships? He's like, no, we pay you to go. I'm like, done. I never saw a brochure. I never stepped foot in West Point until basic, plebe summer. And I just remember thinking, and then I was totally unprepared for it, but I just remember thinking that I have no other choice, right? It's this or go back to LA. I didn't apply for there was no backup. My dad was like, "Why don't you he taught at a community college in LA. He taught languages. He's like, go to Pierce College where I teach, and you get 2 years pretty much for free. And then you can go to, wherever, UCLA, USC, wherever." And I just thought, no way, that's not me. I'm 17. I'm like independent, right? This is me. I want a adventurous life. And then my joke now with my parents is like, "You guys wouldn't let me go in the Girl Scouts, so I joined the Army," So like, take that, Mom and Dad. Now I'm camping, not with any fire or s'mores, but I'm like, now I'm camping with no lights and, and no sleep. But anyway, and then I think my mentality there was just take every opportunity for what it is, jumping out of planes, awesome. I've never had that opportunity. I've never presented myself. Let me take it. Just everything, every club, rock climbing club and this club. I just thought, let me just do it because I've never had that opportunity before, and I just want to try it, right? And so for me, it was this whole, it was a buffet of opportunities. It was amazing, and I was getting paid, right? So I just thought, this is awesome. And then, I would say that's just that was part of my DNA, and it just continued. And so when I met my husband, who actually, and funnily enough, is a classmate, but I met Arrow in Germany at my first duty station. I never knew him at West Point. And he was very adventurous too. And he had just done, after graduation, when you get those 30, 60 days of leave where they pay you, your salary, but you get, the only time you'll get 60 days of leave. And he had spent it doing this quick around the world trip with a friend of his, our classmate. And I just thought, that is so cool. I want to do something like that with you. And he's like, okay. And so we actually, we ended up doing 6 years active duty. And then same thing, we were like, we want to travel. Let's just go for 2 years and see where it takes us, right? And so that's what we did. We traveled for 2 years. Well, we traveled for a year and a half. Money ran out after a year and a half. And so we're in Nairobi. You know, we just climbed Kilimanjaro with some friends, and we're like, okay, we have nothing left. We need jobs. You know, we have nothing. And so his parents paid for our plane ticket back. And I just remember thinking, okay, you know, I just want to have this adventurous life. So here's the thing. I joined the reserve when we got back because we had no jobs and we had no money. And so we found ourselves where Arrow's parents lived in Northern Virginia. And I just remember telling Arrow, okay, let's just go get some, you know, his father used to work for MPRI, and he got us like internships at MPRI, paid internships. And so I entered there for a couple of months. Carl Lono was still the CEO at the time. It hadn't been bought out by L3, and he was the former chief of staff of the Army. So we were working for him in different parts of MPRI, and I was still looking for other jobs because I just thought, you know, there's a bunch of, no offense, older white men here, all retired from the Army. Like I don't want to work in a company like this. I want young people and women and more, you know, racial diversity. And I just thought, okay, I'm gonna look for another job, but this is great, paid internship. And at the same time, we're like, okay, Era, let's find a reserve job, because that's gonna help us too, to, you know, make some money. Well, because we had nothing left. And he's like, yeah, let's go ahead and do that. And so really what I fashioned my reserve job was to look for jobs that were interesting to me. That was it. I mean, the great thing about the reserve is there are no career managers. So that could be sort of scary for some people because they're used to an HRC and someone telling them, here are your 3 choices, right? For us, it was, we found our reserve jobs. And the first one, we met a friend of a friend who interviewed us at Shanae's Pub in Crystal City. This was the interview. And it was a super small team of 12 working at the State Department. And typically there were majors and lieutenant colonels. We were captains, right? And it was in civilian clothes. And you did, instead of your 1 weekend a month, you would do like part of it during the work week at State Department and part of it on the weekend. That I just remember thinking, this is awesome. This is great. I'm getting paid to do this and work at State Department. How cool is this? And literally that's how I really fashioned my reserve career on just what looks exciting, what's interesting, what gets my juice flowing, you know, how can I contribute and grow? So it was sort of, that sort of adventurous life of what more can I do? What else, what looks neat? How can I contribute to, you know, greater society? Sort of, those were the questions I would ask myself. And so that's why when people look at my career, they go, God, you're all over the place. And partly it's because, well, I wanted to have agency and I wanted to lead an interesting and adventurous life.
I mean, what's fascinating to me is how strong, like I've always, well, I say I always know, I did some executive coaching back in my days. And one of the things that I made a connection to was that 100% of adults have behaviors that they exhibit as an adult as a direct result of their childhood. 100%. And from 60-year-old multi-millionaires to 17-year-old Division I college athlete, or, you know, soon to be Division I college athletes. And it's amazing how strong that adventurous theme, like from your childhood, well, and really, man, from your parents. I mean, look at their lives. Talk about adventurous.
I know.
Go from, you know, like just
and just to say something there, their adventure wasn't like they chose it, right? It was something that was thrusted upon them by the vicissitudes of life, you know? And so that's a fascinating thing you just bring up, because you're absolutely right. I got a chance to choose my adventures. And they, unfortunately, you know, we're born in a time where there was a revolution in one country, or you know, my dad was born to very poor parents. And so you're right. I think that strain of, okay, they live this, you know, hard life and they overcame these difficulties. And maybe there's a bit of that to me where I'm like, okay, I want to overcome difficulties too. And I want to honor, you know, the legacy of my parents. because they overcame such difficulties as well. So that's a really interesting sort of, thread that you bring out.
Yeah, because and yes, they were born in those times, but they specifically made choices that other people in their situations didn't make. Right. So your mom chose at 30 to come to the US. Your dad volunteered to go into, WWE. So where, other folks didn't make those choices. So, and then just to see that running in like such a visceral principle. That's actually the book I'm reading right now is Principles by Ray Dalio. Just how that adventure theme is a major life principle, consciously, subconsciously in your life. What is your definition of leadership?
Okay. So, first let me take a step back, because I think something that's important to bring out here are the questions that we ask ourselves. So one thing, so it's funny that you brought up Ray Dalio. So I have his app on my phone too, the Principles app that goes with the book. But one thing that I learned, so probably one of the best gifts I gave myself was in 2007 when I was deployed to Iraq. And I was put in a leadership position that I knew I wasn't necessarily prepared for. And so there's only 3 military. I was working for DIA at the time. I just promoted to major, and I was put in charge of, 3 military in the organization, 1 colonel, 1 senior major, and then myself that just promoted. And we were put in charge of DIA civilians. So civilians who had never been in the military, and in the middle of Baghdad, right? And so I just remember thinking, okay, this is interesting. You lead people differently in a civilian organization deployed than you would a platoon, right? Or a company. And I just thought, okay, I don't know what I don't know. I need to work through some issues, and I think I'm going to get myself a coach. So that for my birthday and for my Christmas present, I got myself a Tony Robbins coach. And I remember looking at some of his stuff beforehand. I'd not done any self-help and anything like that. And I remember looking through this. I'm like, what do I want to gift myself? And I got there right before Christmas. And I said, you know what? For Christmas, and my birthday in January, I'm going to buy myself like 10 sessions with a Tony Robbins coach. And that literally changed my life. And so, and the first thing that they start off with is your primary question. So everyone develops a primary question when they're about 4 or 5 years of age, and it helps them deal with their situation. You could be born to parents of affluence and so go to private schools, and it's good. It's just you still try to fit into your surroundings and live your life by asking yourself this major question. Mine was, am I doing this right, and how I could fit in? I didn't even know I was asking myself this question, right? And that had done so many good things for me. It had empowered many things, like how do I fit in? It's perfect. Like when you're a 17-year-old and you go to West Point, great question to ask, right? How do I fit in? How do I, get in? Don't want to draw attention to myself. I just want to fit in, do what I'm being asked, right? Same when you're traveling around the world to places like Africa, Asia, in places where you stand out. My question of how do I fit in? How do I best, go about living and surviving, okay? And so what she taught me was, that is not like, it's worked for you, but it's not empowering. And so we deliberately changed my question. And then we would set times on the calendar, like on the day I'd have an alarm where I would ask myself that question and I would answer it. And then another alarm would go off at noon. I would ask it, I would venture and answer it. And so my question ended up being, how can I use my talents to make a powerful choice that empowers others? And we've tweaked that over the years since 2007 till now. There's a variation of that. And so what I would do is I'd deliberately say, okay, I would always fall back and default back to my old primary question. And so I would ask my new one? You know, how could I use my attributes or talents to make a powerful choice in this situation? And so what I've learned, so that's all to say, you know, leadership is about not only growing so and again, I attribute a lot of sort of the needs, the human needs, back to Tony Robbins' human needs. And he calls the 4 human needs, you know, either you need love and connection, you need certainty, you need uncertainty, shake things up a little bit, and significance. Those are the 4 basic human needs. And then the 2 other needs of the spirit are growth and contribution. And you want to get to that. And what I've worked out with my Tony Robbins coach and several Tony Robbins sessions was I was very significance driven. That's a bit, it's normal. I mean, think every other West Pointer, you know, right? Just growing up with my father, it was very much, you know, you see results, you go to college, you keep going up the corporate ladder. That was his societal mindset. And I took that, and then it, you know, type A even more so, inculcated at West Point. And so what I've done is how to deliberately pull myself away from using significance as my primary need and try to make it growth and contribution. And so I have to, every morning when I do my morning routine, I just go through a 5-minute, you know, here's my goals, here's my refresher, what I ask myself, the questions that I ask myself during the day, primary question always being the first one, and to work through getting away from significance, and for me, working towards growth and contribution. And so to answer your question finally about leadership, I think for me personally, it's about how do I grow in this situation as a leader, and how do I contribute? So 2 ways, not only contribute to the organization, because there's always a value proposition, right? If you're military or business, it's how does this organization, whether it be a military organization or a business, bring value to others, to people, to society? And then, so that's contribution. And I do the same with people. So people of my organization and people that I, you know, am allowed to lead, just by nature of being in the position that I am, you know, and I'll say that, how am I contributing to them? How am I allowing them to grow and contribute? You know, are they meeting their potential this way? So I ask myself those questions. And that's what I really believe leadership is about. You know, some people say simply it's getting people to do what they don't know they need to do or don't want to do. And so for me, it's specific to growth and contribution for myself and for others.
So powerful. I love that perspective. I want to go back a little bit. Because I'm fascinated by your decision-making process. That's so fascinating and critical for success in life and impact and significance and everything else. Yeah. What do you think the relationship is between adventure and growth?
Yeah, a huge one. And I think, and so that's one of the, so here's the thing, there's a tension between, at least for me, because I always revert back to significance, right? That was my primary driving force. And originally, adventure was my way of seeking significance, right? So I'm not as fast as somebody else in sports. I'm not as intelligent as, you know, the top person, or as Arrow, really, because he's a smart, brilliant man. I'm not as good militarily as, you know, everyone that West Point lauds, whether it's MacArthur or Patton or Eisenhower, you know, et cetera. And so for me, it was, you know what I have agency over is what I decide to do. And I'm going to go climb Kilimanjaro. I'm going to go in the plains of Peru on a dirt bike, you know, we're going to hike Costa Rica in 30 days. And in, you know, just with everything packed. So for me, it was a way of saying, you know, I am significant. Look at these things I'm trying to do. And then I realized I was doing that for a wrong reason, right? Because again, I was chasing significance. And so what I tried to do is to make decisions consciously about growth and contribution. And so really, I ask myself that now, like, okay, am I doing this because it's the right thing, right? Am I doing this because I'm seeking the right things? And for me, it's that curiosity of why am I doing this? Why am I feeling this? Why do I want this? And just asking myself that. And so what I've learned is now in adventure, I seek growth and contribution. And if I ever think, okay, am I doing this for significance? I try to take a step back and reevaluate that. And I'd say, you know, big adventure, moving the family from Tampa to France, you know? And so my kids, you know, are taking the brunt of that. And so I really had to ask myself that question, okay, why am I doing this? Is this good for them? Is this gonna help them grow? And you know, just thinking through those, and the answers, you know, were yes. And I just remember I always had to think through, okay, this isn't about me or significance. And taking a deliberate step back from what that could have done, and just really focus on growth, contribution, what this means to my family. So there is certainly a thread between, you know, the choices that I've made and my driving force. And now I'm purposely trying to make choices based on where I want my driving force to be, which is growth and contribution.
And another amazing, I just think it's so I'm pulling out the themes of Rose's life, and growth, you know, and contribution clearly are a couple of those. What I find fascinating is that before you even, like, there are not many majors that I know, or captains that I know, that, man, for my gift, I'm going to get to myself as a life coach, right? Like how did you, you know, how did you even think that thought? You know, like, talk about growth. That is the epitome of growth mindset. And one of my beefs with the military is, I feel like, you know, and there's a ton of great things about the military, but one of the things that I think that can be improved tremendously is the concept of mentorship. I feel like, right, if you get it, you're like one of the lucky ones, but one in a million. And then even the mentorship that is given is more, it's not true mentorship. It's, this is what you need to know or learn, or that kind of thing. And I thought, you know, anyway, that's,
oh my goodness. I totally, so funny. So a couple of things that you made me just key on there. One, you know, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and one of my frustrations with some of the military ones is just, it interviews some of our great leaders, but it's always on, well, what made you successful in the Army? And it was, you know, it's always very sort of, well, I did 70 rotations at NTC, and therefore I got it. You know, and for me, it's like, okay, that is just the tip of the iceberg. Like, I know nothing about what drives this person and the story, you know? And I just thought, you know, if there's ever a podcast I want to listen to, it's that. It's, let's get to the deep stuff that you may not want to talk about, right? Like, let's be vulnerable and just put it out in the open. We all have faults, right? And I just remember thinking when I was this captain, so it's funny because the year before I went to Iraq, I had done a year in Afghanistan, and it was with JSOC. And Colonel Paul LaCamera, now General LaCamera, USARPAC commander, was there. And I remember running into him, and I'd crack some jokes, you know, with him. And then all of a sudden, we just started having conversations. And I just remember joking with him, like, hey, sir, you're my mentor now, so you have to answer that, you know, and I joked about that. But we kept it up throughout the years, you know, up until, you know, 2006, 7 till now, 2020, I've been able to call him up in you know, no notice, and just say, hey, this is happening. My brigade's they're thinking they're going to send my brigade to Afghanistan. What do you think I need to do? You know, from anything from brigade command issues back to when I was a captain, like, hey, sir, I'm having these questions. What do you think? And it was really interesting how that happened, because I have always been a person willing to ask for help. And that's partly, we'll get to, you know, stories one tells ourselves. I always thought, well, I'm the immigrant girl, you know, kids of immigrants, and I don't know what I don't know. And I didn't have, you know, some of these things growing up like some of our peers did. I didn't go to boarding school. I didn't have some of these, you know, great opportunities. So I always felt like I was at a disadvantage. And I always felt like, well, I'm going to ask for the help I need, and I'm going to get to know people, and they're going to help me. So I was always pretty aggressive about that. So I've always had a lot of mentors. I've had what Napoleon Hill called, you know, like a mind group, or, you know, a group. Yeah, a mastermind group. And I would set those up for myself because I always thought I was at a disadvantage. So just a quick thing about the story I've told myself, I also learned through my coach, like you're telling these stories in your head and they've allowed you to do these things, get great mentors, have a mastermind group, but they're disempowering at the same time. So I've been able to separate now that, okay, yes, I have not been disadvantaged because I was the child of immigrants. I have not been disadvantaged because I didn't get these same opportunities some of my peers did. And so I've been able to grow from that. However, I do want to state that those, again, the stories I've told myself from my past, like everyone does in their head, have empowered certain things. And one is aggressively getting mentors. And I absolutely agree with you. The value of mentors and a mastermind group is so important. And I've had different mentors based on whatever I was doing at the time, and I would say, of one who has stuck throughout is, General Paula Cameron, simply because we would have these conversations no matter what. If I hadn't talked to him in 6 months, I'd still, be able to call him on the phone. If I didn't talk to him in a week, it would be still the same thing, right? And we'd have these running dialogues throughout the last several, years. So one thing I always advise people is get mentors. If you can't get mentors, still do discovery through podcasts, through books like you do. It's always like you have to take ownership of yourself and your self-learning. And if you're in a position where you can't get mentors, you don't have the money to get a coach. And what I've done since 2007 is, coaches are really expensive, especially Tony Robbins coaches. And so I've been very deliberate about, okay, at this time, I need a coach. And then, I would say, and I would tell her, I've had the same coach since 2007 and say, okay, I'm here deployed and I'm going to use you between now and July when I redeploy, right? And then I call her up 3 years later, hey, Patty, I'm here now. I need you again. And I need you for 9 months, a year. And then I'd work through some of the stuff that, we would work on when she wasn't there. And then when I worked at CENTCOM, specifically Commander's Action Group for the CENTCOM commander, I called her up again. I need you again, put me in your calendar. And I used her for that year, And so I've been very deliberate about using coaches when needed, using mentors when needed, and using a mastermind group, when needed as well, and grow deliberately with those.
So man, that's so awesome. So you've really, it's almost like three strategic learning tools that you have been very intentional at implementing in your life. And it sounds like clearly you get value from each, but different value from each.
Yes.
How have you gone about selecting a mastermind group? How do you go about doing that?
Yeah. So completely based on my situation at the time. So one was when I was starting off in business, after running out of money after the Around the World tour, and we found ourselves in Northern Virginia, DC, and a lot of my classmates were there at the time. A lot of them had left the military and were starting up in Fortune 500 companies or, and big firms. And so I remember looking around, seeing, oh, look, this person's there and that person's there. And I got along with him and I got along with her during my time at West Point. And I remember I brought them together, like all these disparate people. And I just said, hey, let's meet once a month for dinner, or drinks. And we all come from different fields. One was consulting, one was defense, one was oil industry. And I think he worked for ExxonMobil in Northern Virginia and then Texas. And I just remember thinking, such different backgrounds. I thought this would be so good for all of us, right? And I just said, hey, this is, I've recently read Napoleon Hill. I like this idea of a mastermind group. What do you guys think? And they were like, yeah, we see value in it. And so that was just a very deliberate, some of them had known of each other at West Point too. They weren't friends, but it was hey, let's just, at this time in our lives, see if this works for us, right? And so that was one deliberate way. Another was when Arrow decided, I joked that his midlife crisis was to go to med school. So he ends up going to med school. And because it had been so many years since from when he applied, from when he had finished biochem at West Point, he could only, instead of having to redo undergrad for 2 years of biochem, he went straight to American University of the Caribbean. That was the only place that would take you without having to redo undergrad. And so he's like, yeah, we're moving to the Caribbean. Like, perfect, right? I'm good with that. No adventure. And so I remember there, I was in a very, very different place, right? I was pregnant with our first kid. And there were a lot of women who were either the girlfriends or wives of some medical students. And I just remember getting together with them and sort of doing the same thing. We're all in a different place in our life. How do we, some of them were becoming moms, like myself. And so just a very deliberate, hey, let's get together. Let's talk about what's on our minds and what do you think our challenges are, and let's be deliberate about helping each other in this current situation. And now, fast forward to more recently, one of my really good friends that I made down at CENTCOM is a Marine colonel. And we joke, we are so completely opposite, right? He is like an Irish white guy, super skinny, cross-country runner, Marine Corps his entire life, reads, meditations, by Aurelius for fun, right? And so, and we call ourselves the twins because, I'm a female Hispanic, very different. And so we joke, we just had struck up this great friendship. And now because he's in DC, we do a Marco Polo almost every week. And we try to one up each other about what books we read, right? And so him, it's like, well, I'm now reading Meditations and here's what I took away from it, right? And so I quickly have to go read it every night and be like, well, this is what I took away from it, right? And so we have our own mastermind group now of just how do, he's been like, well, I take it upon myself to get you prepared for brigade command, to get you, when you're in brigade command, to keep you sharp. And I thought that's great. And so now, so this past year and a half, we've been very deliberate about keeping me sharp in brigade command and getting him prepared for his selection for brigade command too in the Marine Corps. And so, like I said, it's been different masterminds throughout, for different things that I've needed in my life at the time. And they've really sort of happened organically. The first one I really pushed. The first one was like, I'm deliberate, let's do dinner. All of us, we're meeting at this time on this day, and on that first meeting, I was like, everyone get your calendars out. Like, next one's going to be on this day, right? And if you could, unless you're dead or at the hospital, you better be here, right? And so yeah, I think peers, you learn so much from your peers, and it's, they're not going to tell you what you want to hear. Like sometimes like a higher up would or a subordinate, it's more of a real, here's what we're seeing. So that's been really good.
That's awesome. So there's something, this would be an interesting study on the value of having, so a peer group mastermind.
Yeah.
And then, because there's also some old people, right? That there's the different perspective of a generation gap of one or two different generations of having a 70-year-old in your mastermind, so to speak. And then also last week I interviewed a company commander, who's, in her mid to late 20s. And it's just the different perspectives that people bring. And then I love what you said of, just people from different industries, right? There's that whole piece as well, which is another thing that I think the military does not do very well, right? Because we tend to stovepipe in the military. I only talk to other infantry dudes, or you know what I mean? And that's a whole other thing. Now, let me hear your transition into business and entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
What gave you the idea? What was the growth and contribution? What was the thought process? Tell me the mission, all that stuff.
Yeah. So it was born out of necessity. So let me just put it. So I had worked after MPRI. I had worked for a consulting firm for a year, RGS Associates. It was great for learning, especially basics of business. It like I said, completely different from MPRI in that it had a lot of women, a lot of young people, and just a lot of diversity. And I loved that environment. But then I got recruited, after a year, I got recruited to work at BAE Systems. And I just thought, okay, Intel is my discipline. I like it. They had an Intel business And I just thought, okay, this, let me go do what I need to do for them. And I'd worked for them for about 4 years. In the end, I was one of their directors of business development. So I'd worked my way up pretty quickly in a short amount of time to be a director of business development. They had put a lot of time into me, but it was, if you know anything about BD, it's grueling, right? It's, so I was back on the golf course, right? Meeting clients on the golf course. I was doing dinners every night. So what ended up happening was, hours are really long. You're expected to, meet numbers to bring business in. That's the whole reason why you belong, right? My whole role was developing business. And I just remember, Arrows said, okay, I'm going to med school. And I said, perfect, I'll continue working for BAE Systems. And, I'll just stay here in DC and you do that. And so 2 things happened. One is I ended up being pregnant with our first kid. And second, I went down there. I made the mistake of going down to the Caribbean with him to check out where he would be going to school. And I was like, oh my gosh, there is no way you're going here by yourself. Like, this is an amazing island. It's half Dutch, half French, in the middle of the Caribbean. I was like, no, I am moving down here with you. This is amazing, right? And so because of that, I just remember thinking, okay, well, what could I do during this time, right? I didn't realize at that point motherhood is a full-time job. And I just thought, okay, let me set up my own company. I'm gonna set my own company. I'm moving to Caribbean island. BAE Systems wasn't willing, and nor could I really at that point do the business development from there. And we just couldn't work out an arrangement that would work for both of us. So I ended up leaving, and I just thought, you know what, I'd done this for so long. I understand business very well. I understand how to drive business and how to do the development and the capture for a Fortune 500 company. What could I do with this? And so part of my work as business development was to meet other companies throughout DC, to bring them on teams, to be a business, to make a team as we went after work for BAE Systems. And so one of the companies that I had worked with before that I brought on a team, when I sort of started saying, well, I'm going to be moving, they said, well, why don't you just start your own business and we'll be your business partners? And just thought, okay. And they just said, okay, become an LLC, go ahead and register in Virginia, which is very business friendly. And then we will provide you all of our back office. Like we'll own 49%, you own 51. You are a, veteran women, minority owned, all this that speaks to a lot of people who are in DC looking for work. And they said, we'll give you our back office. You have our, used to our HR, used to our tax guy, used to our legal guy, and we will own 49%. And so we have a vested interest in making sure this works. And so that's how I got started. It was super easy for me because they made it super easy. And from on the island, one of the issues they had was human trafficking, right? So a lot of places are human trafficking, from North Carolina to Colorado to everywhere, unfortunately. And I just thought, okay, there's State Department tip money, and I thought I could help them write. Like, I know how to write RFPs, requests for proposals, and answers to those, and do something for a Dutch NGO on the island, that uses all of the BD and capture skills that I've been taught and that I've learned through my time at BAE, and I could do it for this because it meets, what I could do at this time. So that's how I got off the ground. And then I balanced it. I would take, we would do contracts. I would take contracts that I was able to do at the time, that were interesting to me, and that sort of fit into my life, both militarily, with what I was doing with the reserve, and then family-wise. So that's sort of how I would choose my business and choose my job. It's like, okay, this contracting work, yep, I'm interested in that. Whether it was an SBA, I've taught some business classes for the VA, supply chain school, just sort of random things, but things that worked with my life at the time.
So are you still operating, or is it kind of, you are still doing stuff? Can you share some of the stuff that you're currently doing, or is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So couple things. So when I moved out here to France, I thought, how could I develop international business? That would be great. That's been a lot harder than I thought possible. And one obviously is, countries want to develop small businesses and the entrepreneurs, of their own, because that it generates more work, right? More revenue, more tax, etc. So what I ended up deciding was, okay, let me go after some work, think tank type work. I've done that for AFRICOM. Also like looking at supply chains in different regions, a lot of what we call it in the intel field, OSINT, right? Open source. You can do a lot of stuff open source, but you need to evaluate and analyze it and give sort of your thought process, a think tanky type of piece, and give that to whoever the customer is. Another thing I'm doing right now is developing op boards for the Army Reserve. And it's a booze is the main contract. And you could do it from anywhere, right? So the Reserve has plenty of CPXs, plenty of CSTXs, and what they need is, using the date scenario of Ariana, Ethiopia, the fake countries, and sort of write op boards for the Reserve to be able to exercise and train certain brigades. And I think, and that's made even my own knowledge of the Reserve even better. So it's been this, really this huge learning curve. I love, op boards and plans and thinking through, well, what does this unit need to do to practice and get trained and certified on their metal tasks, on their Met. And so it's been neat to do this sort of work from my, home in France. So I have deliberately, so it's funny, I know one of your questions is probably going to be sort of any challenges regarding my business. And I thought, one thing we've always been taught is if you're not growing, you're dying, right? And that's sort of a thing with business. And so there's a very deliberate push to keep growing numbers by quarter. This quarter needs to be better than the last quarter, and the following quarter better be better than this one, And so there's this continuous growth pattern, which is important in business. But I've been able to say, okay, at this point in my life, I've got young kids, I've got a pretty busy military career, my husband's doing stuff too, I'm following his passions. I need to remain small, and I want to remain small. So we're not public. I do essentially contracts that I choose, either because they're interesting, they pay the bills. One, that's pretty important. And also just, I'm thinking, hey, this is something I could, again, grow and I can contribute to this organization if I take on this work. So that's sort of how I've developed my business. I do hope to grow it to become a bigger firm. I just know now is not the time. And I think knowing the right time, I'll be able to do that. But right now, I know it's not the right time.
Sure. No, that's great. And just the wisdom, because I have also found that in business, well, and in life. So, so much of the time, the answer to your business phase or your life phase is more. Well,
Yeah.
what about deeper, or higher quality? One of the other things I feel like that is it seems to be, I don't know. I don't know if this is just a story that I'm telling in my head, or it just doesn't seem like mastery is a priority like it used to be. So anyway, that's such a great point, that just the wisdom that you said, hey, look, I have made the decision to more in my business now is having the freedom and flexibility to choose what I want to choose,
right,
based on where I'm at, and that's where I want it, right?
That's absolutely true. Yeah. And just to bring up something up here. So what's been interesting about, I thought this 1.5 to 2 years in France was just about teaching the kids a different language, right? It was about language acquisition. And what I've learned is I've learned so much just from being here about consumerism. So what I, initially just thought capitalism is it. We got it right. And I was a true believer in that. And then, so, I went to grad school at Oxford, and it was the first time I was the only American in my group of 30, which was awesome in its own right, because everyone's questioning in this environment. And then we started reading Schumpeter, who talks about creative destruction, right? For capitalism to work, you always have to create something that destroys something that you've already created to keep the cycle, right? But here's the thing, it's not necessarily, it's a good cycle. It could be a good cycle for humanity. You come with some great advancements, but you have to hold that intention with all the issues that means, right? I mean, you've destroyed something else that could have been, the livelihood of somebody. It could have been important at that first, humanity for some other right. And what I've realized by being in France is that you have to slow down. And here they are much more about being than doing or thinking through the next year to 5 years, right? And like, with the business plan, it's what are my quarter numbers by quarter? What's my 5-year plan? It's always very systematic about looking out in the future and bringing your value and making sure people know what your value is. And what I've loved about being here is things are closed on Sunday, period. No. So I would drive up to a place, be like, oh no, I forgot it's closed on Sundays.
Not just Chick-fil-A.
I know, right? Now think of the entire place being Chick-fil-A, right? It's like nothing. And so what you see are people walking on Sundays with their family, going to have dinners with friends, just at their homes. It's just a sort of let's enjoy what we have. It's not this massive consumerism, and it's starting to trickle in now. Like things are open Sunday mornings now, like certain grocery stores, and in Paris, everything's still open, right? Because of just the tourists expecting things Sunday to be open. But the mindset still is, we don't want to be spoiled by that. We want to sit back, enjoy, take in, right? And we want sort of this lifestyle, not to just be about what's next, but being deliberate about our choices and spending time with family. So I think it's been absolutely fascinating to be able to sit back and go, yeah, actually, I never questioned why I would do these things, but I need to reconcile having a business and meeting numbers and quarters and having this lifestyle of, okay, I do, I want to have Sundays off. I want to be there for my kids, and sort of, reconcile both.
Yeah. And that brings up another point back to the mastermind group of having other countries in your mastermind group, right? My brother-in-law is from Ghana. One of my best friends is from the Ivory Coast, who's watching live now. My other brother-in-law is from Germany, and so just being, just surrounding yourself with people from different countries, helps remind you that the world does not revolve around the U.S. You know what I mean?
It's true. Yeah.
And then also the different core values and different cultures.
Yeah.
That those other countries bring. There's so much value, I feel, in having a global mindset, in surrounding yourself with people for that reason.
That's so true.
Like when we went to Spain, same deal. Spain, it's like, in fact, one of the signs on the door of a business is, we're open when you see us. We're not open, we're not open when you don't see us. That was literally the sign on this. I'm like, my American business head exploded. Like, you can't do that.
I can imagine. Exactly. I mean, it's taken me this long, really, to just, metastasize that. Like I gotta sometimes think, not everyone should be like America. We do some amazing things, but not everywhere should be like that. And you're absolutely right. You have to get over that.
Yes. Okay. So now, and I want to introduce one other concept here, one other thought here. Emotional intelligence.
Oh, yeah.
Important, not important. How has it impacted your life, your journey, your business, your leadership?
Yeah. Most important. Most important. I mean, I think it's even more important than regular intelligence. People really value SAT scores, or if you're top of your class. And it's been shown that actually if you have emotional intelligence, it's even more important than regular intelligence, right? And I think it's even more necessary now in our day and age when we're missing things like kindness to other people. So I really cultivated that, honestly. And I think partly because my primary question before I changed it was always, how do I fit in? And so how do I best fit in? And that meant I was always looking around, evaluating, reading faces, reading body language, trying to, fit in seamlessly so I'd never bring attention to myself, So the positive that brought me was being able to, read people, understand, empathize, understand different viewpoints. And clearly, I've changed my primary question, as I told you, but I think emotional intelligence is the biggest part of leadership that people don't talk about, at least in the military. And partly, as we say, we're so diverse as an American society. When you look at our military, it needs to be a composition of what America is. And so we're seeing that, in our enlisted ranks. I would say you see less of it in the officer ranks. But, my limiting belief before was, well, I'm just going to do what's interesting and have fun in the military because I'm never going to be a military senior leader because I'm not the military ideal. The military ideal is, I mentioned them before, Patton, MacArthur, Eisenhower, old white, super storied, and run fast and all this. I'm like, that's not me, right? I played tennis in high school because I couldn't play basketball, right? And so, this limiting belief is like, well, actually, no, I too could be a military ideal, and now we see a lot more like female Hispanics that are generals. Like, you say, okay, yeah, someone looks like me up there. But I think emotional intelligence allows you to understand everyone is on a path to, wherever they want to go to. And it's a path of challenge because it's a good thing, right? You want a path of challenge. It's part of your own growth and your contribution. And emotional intelligence allows you to lead with empathy too. I think it's probably one of the most important things. And I'm trying to be very deliberate about that, especially in the military, is leading, because we in an MI brigade, you've got soldiers that have several master's degrees, several languages, you have, and people who have been trained in human intelligence, right? How to get information out of you. They've been trained very specifically for very specific things. And for me, it's about, okay, generationally, we had someone in our formation in our last annual training, our field exercise, who was born on not September 11th, but around September 11th. I think he was born just a couple months before. And to me, that's shocking, right? I was already in the Army when that happened. I was like, oh my God, he's known nothing but Iraq and Afghanistan and what the news has said, right? And so for me to be able to communicate to all these different people, different genders, different economic diversities, different generational generations, I just thought, okay, I need to have emotional intelligence. I need to be empathetic. And that's when I realized I lead best as well. So it's something that I've deliberately tried to work on.
What are some tips on growing one's emotional intelligence?
So I think there is a book called Emotional Intelligence. Well, one is, so it's hard, especially because we're stepping out of one's comfort zone, right? One is to be curious, just to ask questions of oneself. Okay, like when my daughter does something and automatically I get so angry, and I started thinking, okay, why? What is this triggering in me, right? It's to ask yourself that. Why does when this person do this, or for example, when that person believes that in American politics, why does that? I don't personally think putting a border wall is a good use of taxpayers' money, for example. And I think we're a nation of immigrants, and we've done well for that. So I'm questioning that, right? Of my own commander in chief, right? And so I have to sit back and go, okay, why? Why does this bother me? What are my thoughts on this? Why do I feel this way? And it's really just asking yourself first those questions, and then asking that of someone else. Okay, well, why did she react that way? Why did he react that way? What is it that I don't know? Maybe there's something going on in that person's life, in that person's trajectory. Maybe they're undergoing certain challenges right now that they're coming at it from a very different angle, right? And so I've always learned, so if there's one takeaway from today, it's ask better questions. And so I honestly think we are really a summation of the questions we ask ourselves. And if you're going to ask crappy questions, excuse my French, you're going to get crappy answers, right? And that's one of the main things I've learned is you say, well, gosh, why am I so bad at that? Or why is this so hard for me? Well, it's going to be hard for you. And you're going to be bad at that, right? Your mind's going to automatically answer the questions that you ask. So I would say be deliberate about asking the best questions you can. And that's one reason why the first thing the Tony Robbins coach does is find out what your primary question is, rewrite that primary question, and put it in your calendar to keep asking a new primary question that's just empowering, not disempowering. And then after that, formulating a whole new set of questions that are empowering. So something bad happens, instead of, well, why did this happen to me, right? Terrible question. Good question. What good could come from this? And so I've tried to teach my daughters this too. What good could come from this? Well, what could I learn about this? What is this person dealing with that I may not know? How may that person be feeling? And so empathetic leadership, emotional intelligence, I really think really starts with the questions you ask yourself and just being curious about, again, being a little bit vulnerable, being ready to be sort of uncomfortable and asking yourself those uncomfortable questions.
Okay, so this is another topic that is, so one of my, you're familiar with the concept of love languages. Well, one of my love languages is acts of Mexican culinary service. Okay,
I don't think that was in the book, Noble.
that's in Noble's edition. So that's one of my love languages, right? Is Mexican food, right? Another one of my love languages that is almost as as up on the list is questions. I love questions, and I learned it from my parents. But what's been interesting is, so Kathy, so my awesome wife, because we have gone back and forth with this. She is growth minded as well, and that's the kind of people that I attract are growth minded people. If you're not growth minded, you're not my people. And not that I don't love you, I'll still love you, whatever. But so anyway. But what's been interesting is, for me, man, I could literally interview you for 24 hours straight and not and come up with new questions and But with Kathy, what's been interesting, she's like, dude, how do you come up with the questions? How do you come up with the questions? She's like, I'm like, well, what have you asked questions about? Like what? Because she's like, dude, I don't ever ask anyone any questions ever, And I'm like, well, why is that? And she's like, well, I said, so what have you asked questions about? And she said, well, I guess I only ask questions about stuff that I'm really interested in. And if I'm not interested in it, I don't even think to ask questions. And me, it's the opposite. I'm always thinking of questions, and it's trying to prioritize which ones and when and who. And so, and I think you and I are very similar in that we are naturally curious. Yeah. We feel like it is possible to develop the ability to ask questions.
I agree. And what they say is, people like to hear themselves talk, right? And so one is, if you're curious genuinely about somebody, they're going to want to talk about what interests them. And so part of it is that, well, finding out what interests them. And I feel I am similar to you, Noble, in that I love when, as soon as I meet someone, it's like trying to get to the essence of that person. Like, well, why? Why did you do that? And what does that mean for you? Right. And so sometimes it's probably like at a cocktail party, it's probably bordering more than they could take. And they're like, whoa, I barely know you. But I'm always like, well, what made you make that decision? And how did that make you feel? And what does that mean? And so you're right. But what I've learned is, sometimes it's just as important to listen, right? And to let someone talk and just say, okay. And to keep asking that question, to delve a little bit deeper, keep peeling that onion layers. But they're going to want to talk about what's interesting to them, and letting them, talk about what's interesting to them. So I agree with you. Questions are so important.
And this is a big topic, man, that I want to explore more in the future. Is it seems like it's easier for me to ask questions of you than it is for me to ask questions of me.
Yeah.
For a couple reasons. One, sometimes I don't want to know the answer.
Right.
Like, because
exactly.
One of my superpowers that I have developed over my lifetime, and I could write an Encyclopedia Britannica series on the concept of avoidance, right? how to avoid the elephant in the room, right? I am a master at avoiding, the junk in my trunk and all this other stuff, right? And until it's unavoidable. So, and I'm working on that. That's one of my EQ growth things. But that's one reason why I feel like some people are not good at asking themselves questions, is they don't want to know the answer.
Exactly.
Number two is what I found, because I'm new in this whole emotional intelligence journey. I'm 2 years in a very intentional, like that's, I won't say that's all I've been thinking about, but for 2 years, that has been my driving theme and interest is emotional intelligence, because I literally did not know it even existed. So the second reason why I feel like a lot of people are not necessarily good or natural at asking themselves questions, or at least for me, is I don't speak. Prior to 2 years ago, I've never spoken emotional intelligence language. I've never, so I don't even know, and this is going to sound crazy, but using the Latin term trivium, which I learned in my homeschooling days, not me being homeschooled, but our daughter, is the trivium stands for three ways. It sort of means in Latin, grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric. I didn't even know the grammar of emotional intelligence. Like literally, no kidding. 2 years ago, my wife asked me, I got emotional. Out of nowhere, boom, I got waterworks going. Like cool waterworks, though, not like, you know what I'm saying? It's cool, right? Anyway, so
of course.
The tears are going, right? And so I'm like, man, what is going on? And Kathy's like, so, hey, Noble, what are you feeling, right? And I said, I have no idea. She's like, no, seriously, like, what are you feeling? I'm like, I honestly have no idea. And she said, okay, let's start with this one. All right, let's start at 10,000 feet. EQ 101, right? Kindergarten level. Are you happy or are you sad? Right? Right? And I literally couldn't even answer the question. I didn't even know. I don't know. And so I feel like that's the second reason is, in a book called Emotional Intelligence 2.0, it talks 68% of people have difficulty defining how they feel.
Yes.
And so if you don't know, the emotional intelligence grammar, it's going to be tough to ask yourself some of those questions that are necessary and important to help develop your emotional intelligence.
Yes.
Right. And then the third thing is, as a result of not being super familiar, because listen, at least in my experience, the language of emotional intelligence is not common in America, in my opinion.
I think it's becoming more common, but I agree with you.
I totally agree. It is becoming more common. So the third thing I would say is, because it's not super common yet, and folks are not super aware of the emotional intelligence grammar, the ABCs of emotional intelligence, it's tough.
Yes.
And just the fact that learning a new language is learning French, man, I like, oh my goodness, are you kidding me, right? Like, that's tough. And do I really want to invest the time in learning the language that I have to learn in order to ask myself these tough questions, right?
Yes.
And it's like, well, you know what? I've lived most of my life without any knowledge of emotional intelligence, so who cares, right?
Yeah.
I can get the rest of my life without it, right? You know, so anyway.
Yeah, but you're totally shortchanging the human experience is about emotions, right? It's about not just the good, but the bad as well. That's how you grow and contribute.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to cut you off. I'm sorry, but I have so much to say on this topic.
I can't wait. So one other thing is, so one other thing that I want to say, just as a new to this world of emotional intelligence, what it has done for me is it has brought life from 2D to 3D, or from 3D to 4D, right? So, and it's crazy coming from my perspective, as I popped out of the womb as a people guy, right? I popped out of the womb working the room. You know what I mean? What's up, doc? You know, nurses, right? All this kind of thing. And for me, I'm in one sense, I'm really upset that I've missed out on so much of life and people because I have not been aware of this other world. But on the other side, I'm very thankful and excited that I get to explore aspects of people that I've never even been aware of.
Yeah, gosh, that is so good. I mean, it also shows just the fact that your journey includes self-growth, which includes this part, which makes people feel uncomfortable. I think that's why. So I have a couple of theories. One is that we are a nation of doers, right? And that is what is celebrated in society, especially because we both come from military background. It's absolutely celebrated in the military. You do, you don't feel, right? Feeling may mean you start becoming empathetic to why the Taliban's the Taliban. Why did they get there, right? And so you don't, your enemy doesn't look like humanity. Otherwise, you have an issue fighting them. And so I think you're right. And partly there's so many things I can even talk about, just the military that we've grown up in West Point and outside. Not only does it suppress emotions, you're not meant to show them, you're not meant to analyze them or ask about them, but it's the same thing with femininity. It suppresses femininity in both men and women, right? And it's a part that everybody needs. You need as much masculine as you do feminine. And so trust me, that's been a whole learning cycle for me, especially as a mother and a wife, right? Is how to leave the work at home, how to leave the military leader at home or at work. And when you come home, it's okay, let me start thinking through it. Let me be empathetic. Let me, be emotionally intelligent and try to empathize with what my kids are feeling, what my husband's feeling or thinking right now. And that, again, the military sort of suppresses that because it doesn't need you to be good at that in order to win wars, right? To do its core mission. So unfortunately, I feel like we haven't really grown up in a time when that was really important, even though it's now being shown through research that it is the most important thing. And again, why do people read novels? Why do we go to movies? It's because it shows the human experience, right? And it's one sometimes of suffering, sometimes of sadness, frustration, anger, injustice, but then also all the good things that happen too. And sometimes, it's not that you need the bad to have the good, but life is both. That's what it is. It's all emotions. And it's interesting now to see how kids these days are learning about these emotions. There's books that I got for my kids that they were doing, before we moved to France, and even here, where it's like a unicorn and he goes through all these, every book is a different emotion. Sadness, jealousy, loneliness, anger, frustration, happiness, when I'm so happy, what do how to deal with that? Like, just so much joy. And it's so funny that it's got this little unicorn that deals with all of these different emotions. And it's one to teach kids how to first express their emotion, because it's so important. And then second, ask, well, why am I feeling this? How am I feeling? What's triggered me to feel this way, good and bad, and what to do about it, right? And so it's from the little unicorn that's feeling so much utter joy, that one. And the lesson was, well, bring joy to others too. Don't just be like, well, I'm just so joyful right now, but like, okay, well, how could I get this person to feel joy, and that person? And then same thing with all, sort of what we call negative emotions. But just knowing, okay, yes, you need to be curious. You need to go in that vulnerable space and ask yourself, ooh, this does not feel good. Why am I feeling this way? And sort of going into that and asking yourself, why? And I also think that today, because it's so easy to distract with your phone, to quickly go on Facebook, to quickly go on Instagram, and that suppresses all of that. It's hard to balance both, but it's to say, okay, well, this person has their life together, right? Because it looks like that on Instagram with the filters that they put. It looks amazing. But then to say, okay, am I doing this because I'm trying to escape something? I'm unhappy. I'm not, maybe I'm not in where I'm at right now with my weight or with my family or with my job or, whatever, fill in the blank. And again, it goes back to asking good questions. Okay, why am I looking at this right now? Am I trying to escape something? Am I trying to escape feeling something? So I'm with you. I'm on the emotional intelligence journey and trying to label my emotions, trying not to judge them, and trying to understand why I feel them, and trying to teach that to my kids too. I think it just makes you live the human experience like we're meant to experience it, and it makes you a better leader anywhere, military, business, in your community. That's what it is. We're meant to be a community and to commune with others. And that just makes you a better person to commune with.
That's right. I love that. And it's 100%. And that's, that is part of emotional intelligence, is being others aware and how others aware. Another thing too, that's been really revealing and helpful and insightful for me, that Kathy really helped me out with, is just realizing that behind every emotion and feeling is a story and a belief. So unpacking that, so it's like an atom, right? So if you pull apart the atom, you got the proton, neutron, electron, right? We're talking way outside of my comfort zone here, but similarly, you unpack an emotion and feeling, and you've got a story, you've got a belief. And what he helped me realize was, which again, this is all like just literally the discovery of the atom for me, because I did not know about any of this stuff, is that she's like, look, and then of course, another part of the feeling and emotion is the behavior, right? What's the behavior that you are exhibiting as a result of, the feeling and emotion, as a result of the story that you told yourself about this, feeling, and realizing that. And again, this is going to sound probably completely ridiculous to you, but for me, this was groundbreaking, is that you can separate the belief and the story from the emotion and feeling. And because before, it was all one and the same, literally all of them, the behavior, the emotion, the feeling, the belief, the story, it was all one thing. And that's all I knew. Like, I'm punching the wall and it's all one, and I can't not punch the wall. I have to punch the wall. Okay, well, let's step back, right? So just the power of being able to separate, analyze, kind of like an out of the body experience. Like, okay, what's going on here? Man, the power, because, again, here's the thing is, there's so much stuff. So like, the limiting beliefs, right? Our limiting beliefs So, one of the other questions I was going to ask you is what were your stories and what are your current stories, right? Because what percentage of our lives are a result of our stories?
Oh my gosh, everything.
That are operating that we're not even aware of, that I developed when I was 5 years old, and my dad was throwing pots and pans through the kitchen window, right?
Yep.
The stories that I created that, and so like how much of our, well, even in a positive way, your life from an adventure standpoint, I am going to have adventure, period, right? And that was like, became, well, and in a way it is part of your DNA because your parents kind of lived that way as well. So literally it's like your blood type, but how, what percentage of our lives are dictated by our stories and you made another great point earlier on, is that at one point served us well, right? They were a survival mechanism or a coping mechanism that worked great when we were 5 or 8 or 13.
But
we
no
don't
longer.
need when we're 25 or 35, or you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, there's so much. So it's funny because I didn't even know that I was telling myself stories until I got my Tony Robbins coach, right? Like I said, and that single decision, like I said, other than the decision of who you marry, was probably the second most important decision in my life. And it was really sort of unpacking all this stuff I've been telling myself to go, okay, wow, what story am I telling? So again, empowering for some part of your life and then no longer useful. And let me just bring up the fact that also we do that a lot with success, right? If I only become this grade rank, fill in the blank, if I'm just a colonel, if I finally become, a master sergeant, then I'm going to be successful. Those little stories that we tell ourselves, you're continually chasing, something that is falsely fabricated by yourself, right? And so I used to tell, again, because of the 4 human needs, significance was my main factor, what I was trying to always to meet. And that's why, like I said, I've been deliberate to shift it to growth and contribution. But I would do that only if, if I get this next job, or if I get this next raise, if I get this next position at BAE, then I could say I've arrived, right? It's like, why? What does that mean? Getting there, it means nothing else than any other arbitrary measure of significance I put on myself. I would say the latest one I've discovered this year, as I'm thinking through, because I get a lot of questions now, as a brigade commander. So, well, what made you, successful? How did you get selected for this? And part of it's luck and timing. Part of it's being, making your luck and timing in that you were there, you had prepared yourself for when the opportunity presented itself. That opportunity, you were ready for it, right? So I do get those questions, and I try to answer also by saying, the story that I used to say, which was, I'm a daughter of 2 immigrants who, had a very difficult life, and they surmounted that. And my father was the first, in his family to go to college. And that was such a big deal, like I said, 17 in 1945. He survived, the end of World War II and the Reconstruction. He was in for 6 years. And he spent all that time in Europe, reconstructing France, Germany, Italy, all of that. And so he has these amazing stories, but he used the GI Bill to pay for college. And he had gone to USC back when USC was probably easier to get into and also a lot cheaper. And he used the GI Bill to pay for that. And he worked all night at the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Factory in LA making tires, and so he barely slept for 4 years so he could put himself through college. And so to me, it was this, okay, I have a story where, I'm only meant to achieve this because, my father went from poverty to this, college graduate, and for me, it's like, well, I'm going to go from here to here, and then I would put self-imposed limits on myself. And I thought, why? why do I just need to do here? You know, why am I limiting myself? You know, I'm only meant to do this, go to this college and maybe this graduate school and only do this. And then I thought, okay, thank you, belief. Thank you, story. You worked well for me. You've got me to this point. Now I'm going to put you aside and start telling myself a new story. You know, in order to move from here on out, post brigade command, business leader, mother, wife, I need a new story that's going to allow me to be empowered. So, you know, I'm 43. We're living now the longest than we've ever had. Let's say 80, 90, right? I've got just as much time left, you know, barring any accident, that I've lived. And I feel like I want to be useful for the next 40 years of my life, 50 years from my life. I'm like, I know I have more to contribute. What could I do? And I just started thinking, well, I could grow my business. I'm interested. Maybe I'd love to be ambassador one day. Maybe I could do this, you know, and I just started thinking through other possibilities that I never thought were possible given my current story, which was, you know, in the framework of my family and what we've achieved, I meant to go here and that's it. And now, you know, I finally thought through that story and said, okay, time for me to move on from this. And like I said, it really goes back down to everyone is talking to themselves in their heads. You're always asking yourself a question. And so it's, okay, start really paying attention to those questions you're asking yourself and the stories we tell ourselves. Hey, I'm late again for the 5th time this week because whatever, right? Well, really, why? Why are you late? Is there something here that you're not thinking through? Do you just really not want this job because it's not you? It's not meeting your needs. It's not creative enough. It's not really what you want. It's, you know, truly not your passion. It's really ask yourself those uncomfortable questions. And really asking ourselves, what story am I telling myself now? Right? And one thing, my brain, I'm sure a lot of people do this too, defaults to the negative. Oh no, I know, you know, I let my daughter, 8-year-old, walk by herself to the supermarket and buy something. Like, well, what if a car gets her? What if someone asks her to get in the car? What if, you know, she gets lost? I mean, none of this is true, right? And it's like, okay, stop with these crazy stories, right? And be deliberate about, okay, what have I taught her? What have I empowered her with? What have I, you know, and ask the good questions. But yes, I believe stories and questions are really, we are meaning making machines. We make meaning out of everything. Anything that happens, like you and I, let's say something happened to us right now, we're having coffee and something happened outside, we would take 2 different meanings from that, you know? And so that's the thing. It's, you control the meaning you make out of everything that happens to you, whether it's good or bad. And I think it's important that you tell yourself a meaning that's going to be powerful and empowering rather than disempowering.
That's right. And yeah, and accurate. You know, how many of my stories are accurate?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And again, and again, I've never studied this aspect of emotional intelligence, but what percentage of our stories come from our childhood? Well, I guess all of them would, right? All of them would come from our.
Yeah.
I would think that all of our stories. Well, I'm sure we acquire them as we go, I guess.
We do. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
High school, I probably created some new stories. West Point, I created some new stories. Right. So I guess we're always, maybe we're always writing.
We're continually.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think they're always on the bait because we don't question this, right? We don't question what we've been telling ourselves for years. So now it's about, okay, let's start thinking, when did I start telling myself that? Was it something I did to cope as a teenager, right? Why did I tell myself that? So I think it's that. I think it's that, I think we continually make up stories, but it's being deliberate about understanding, okay, I remember I made that up in freshman year of college because it got me through this difficult time. Or, you know what I'm saying? Or when I got married, I started saying this. Or when I took on this job, I started viewing myself as that. And that, you know, you could use it also to empower yourself. Like if you're a new business owner, you don't know much about business, it's say, okay, visualize yourself in that. It's a partly visualization and storytelling, really. It's like, okay, I am worthy to be here. I have a great idea. And a vision for me of a CEO is that, and sort of acting that way empowers you to be that person, to be that CEO. Like I said, those are empowering stories because you have agency over them. You've deliberately crafted them to help you. But also as important is to know when you're no longer to use it.
Yes. And man, what, oh, this is so money. What percentage of our stories did we auto write versus did we intentionally write? And I know just for me, man, I don't, and this is again probably a reflection of where I'm at on my emotional growth journey, which is still probably in the kindergarten phase, is what percentage of my stories did I intentionally write versus unintentionally? And I'll be honest with you, man, just thinking about it off the top of my head, I honestly can't think of a story that I intentionally wrote, which is super terrifying. And I'm sure I'm sure some of them are positive, but I'm sure I know a truckload of those stories have not been positive. And I have not taken the time yet to go back and do my list of, okay, what are my stories? What are positive stories? What are negative stories? And then also thinking of another thought is, I think the other thing that's critical in the concept of these stories is what's the origin story of my story, right?
Yes,
what is
absolutely.
The origin story, right? Is figuring
out. So at first, I think it's just amazing that you're already thinking through this, right? In your emotional journey, is that you're willing to sit down and start thinking, okay, what stories am I telling myself? Which have been good and bad? If you want to use those terms, right? Empowering, disempowering. I think that's, again, most people don't really want to get into that vulnerable state where they're starting to question what they've told themselves. One of the, like when I would workshop something with my Tony Robbins coach, one thing we would look at is everyone has various personalities, right? Just like an onion, we're all complex beings. We're not just one person, And so it was looking at we would do it in circles, like a Venn diagram, almost like, okay, label your personalities, right? And so I would say professional Rose, huge circle, right? Because I was only concentrating on work at that time. Military, a smaller circle right there. Fun Rose, that was like a teeny tiny little dot, like I wasn't having any fun. I wasn't doing things for fun. I wasn't celebrating achievements. I was always continually having to move forward. And so we physically drew circles of what I thought my different person and named them different personalities and what it was now. Then we would do one of what I wanted it to look like. So like, for those who are moms, those who are wives, those who are, fathers, sons, and also, business, and then community leader or church leader, whatever it was, draw out what you wanted it to look like. And then the circles, big or small, based on how you wanted that to be reflected in your life. And then to look at the difference. And that was a great visualization to say, okay, the stories that I've told myself, I'm here now. And I see I'm very unbalanced where this circle's super huge. It's only supposed to be 8 hours of my working life. But this is where I want to be, and to be deliberate about, visually looking at one-on-one and looking at that, every morning to say, okay, here's where I'm at. Here's where I want to be. And that's one way to sort of look at where am I expending my energy? What do I look like every day right now? And then be deliberate about, is this what I want is this what I want to look like? Is this what my personalities are and what has atrophied in time? So I think that's just as important as evaluating the stories that we say.
That's money. That's fascinating. I'll have to chew on that.
I'm just trying to think through some tools too that, we worked on that could be helpful to, to anybody.
Yes, that's exactly right. So speaking of tools, what resources, podcasts, books, tools have been, the most impactful to you in your growth journey?
Yes, yes to all. so so I'm a huge podcast person, mainly because I download a bunch, and then whether I go out running or I go work out, I listen to them. I'm probably would lift heavier if I had like heavy metal going on, but but I feel like I need to listen to podcasts. And here's the thing about podcasts: you can listen to it at 1.5 speed. So I feel like I get through more that way, and I listen in more. So one is to absolutely have that in my toolkit. I listen to a variety of podcasts. I read books all the time, and I get suggestions either from the podcasts I listen to, or from my mastermind, or from my my mentors or friends, and I get different ones and I add them to my to listen list or to my read list. So those are important. One, and the other thing I think that is also pretty important is to put yourself in situations where you're uncomfortable. So by that I mean challenging yourself to do things that you never thought you would do, or that you would want to do, or one, like emotions, asking yourself the questions that makes you feel uncomfortable. Well, why am I feeling this way? What is the origin story behind this, right? Another could be of something where you felt uncomfortable to even try it. So for example, I would say one of the highlights in my military history is the time I spent at CENTCOM. And that came from, I finished battalion command, and I'd call, Paula Camera, General Camera, and I said, hey, what do you suggest I do now? I just finished this. I don't know what the next step for me should be. I don't know what my future holds. And said, you can't go wrong. General Joe Votel is going to be the next CENTCOM commander this summer. I suggest you go down there, take a 1-year mobilization and learn something new. I said, okay, let me learn something new. So I started looking, called people down there, called friends of friends of friends. You know how that works. It's the network. And then someone said, hey, there's a position in J5 planning. So I'm not a planner. I'm not a SAMS grad. I'm not a, JAWS grad, all that stuff. And I just thought, I'm totally unqualified to do this. And I was. And I just thought, okay, I remember, sending a note to the colonel who was in charge of that section and said, I'm willing to work hard. I'm willing to learn. And I'm not, what you typically go for, your SAMS grad, JAWS grad, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not a planner. I've never learned how to plan. And he's like, we're going to use you anyway. Perfect. Okay. So I go down there with the family, go down to Tampa. And I was like, Era, I'm totally uncomfortable. This is out of my comfort zone. It wasn't even MI, right? It was just general planning for one of the major plans that we have in the Middle East. And major, I mean, like, we're talking over 100,000 soldiers, like World War II, we're talking massive planning, right? So I have no history in doing that. And I just thought, okay, this is making me absolutely uncomfortable. This is a good thing. And so I go down there, and I told my business partners, I'm like, hey, I need to do this at this point in my life. This is a skill I need to have. And they took the business for that time. So I go down there, and I just start asking to do stuff. I said, okay, what courses are there in planning? Obviously, I'm not going to take a night course for SAMS people. They don't have that. But I was like, teach me what you learned. And I started going over some of that stuff. I started staying late, just sort of reading the plan, seeing how it all intersected. I started volunteering to do things. For example, they have a quarterly commanders conference at CENTCOM headquarters Forward, which is in Qatar. And we would meet, so the 4-star CENTCOM commander would meet there with all of his 3 stars. So the ARCENT, the 3-star Army general in charge of all Army Central Forces, then the Navy Central Forces Admiral, the Air Force Central Forces, the Marine Corps Central Forces, the SOCCENT Special Forces. So all these 3 stars and this 4-star are all sitting around the table. and they're deliberately talking through, like, just talk about a mastermind group, right? This was like, I get myself into the room, sit there, and literally just take notes. It went on for 3 days, by the way. So like, 8 to 10 hour days, and just take deliberate notes just about what were they asking, what questions were they asking, what were they talking about, what were they thinking, just those stuff. Like, I was curious about it. And I'd read their body language. Well, what did he, when he said that, what did he think? I was just curious. And then I just said, okay, I want to brief at one of these next time. And so the guys that were working this plan were all, retired colonels who were now there. I think it had like, I don't know, 50, maybe no, 70 civilians on this plan, all former retired colonels that were trained in SAMs and former brigade commanders and all this. And I just thought, teach me what I need to know. I want to be able to brief whatever we're working on this plan at the next commanders conference, right? So I put myself out there, and they're like, oh, young girl, you don't know any of this, right? So I'm like, teach me. So they were very, they didn't care. They'd been working this plan for years. I'm like, sure, we'll teach you what you need to know. So sure enough, I started getting all this knowledge. Then we had the DASD for plans, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for plans. So like a 2-star equivalent civilian from Pentagon come down. And I was like, and I said, I want to brief this to her. And I just said, make sure all of you guys are in the room though, because I don't know the details of this, and this, right? I don't know the logistics, supply chains like a logistician would. I don't know the Air Force side of the bombings. Yeah, I need the Air Force retired colonel there. I need the artillery guy. You know what I mean? Like, so they were all there. The briefing took 3.5 hours. Like, that's how deep and detailed. And this lady was just absolutely brilliant. Again, not military, a civilian SCS taking this briefing. I just remember thinking the level of questions that this person was asking. I didn't know all the answers, but I just said, okay, I introed it, I briefed it. And when they would ask specific questions, I said, ma'am, the right person to answer that is, so-and-so. So I put myself in this super uncomfortable position where I knew I didn't know anything, but it was such a rewarding experience. I just thought, you know what, I leave this 1 year with an amazing understanding of what goes into this intricate plan. And then, as fate would have it, I ended up briefing, one of the commanders conferences, and I get a call the next day, and from, I don't know, you may know the name, Bill Osland, a legend colonel. His battalion had the most Medal of Honor recipients in Afghanistan. So he had been working with General Joe Votel for JSOC, SOCOM, CENTCOM, and he was the CAG director at CENTCOM. He said, hey, we want you to interview for a job at the CAG. I'm like, oh my God, like, of course, this is amazing, right? I thank you for considering me. And I don't know if I'm going to make it. I didn't tell him this, but I thought just as, okay, let me try it. And we had conversations, and then ends up that they want me up on the Commander's Action Group. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm so not ready. Like, this is given to, the best of the best at CENTCOM, active duty. Like, and at first thing I said, do you know I'm a reservist? That was like my first question out of my mouth, right? They're like, yeah, we don't care. I'm like, okay. I'm like, I'm not a planner. I'm not, like, we don't care, right? As long as you keep that off tempo, we're good. The op tempo, again, nothing like I've ever experienced in my life. So we were out of Tampa, and we would fly into the Middle East 2 weeks out of every month. And then we'd go, it was crazy. I mean, and so here's the thing, you could sleep on the plane. He had his own plane. So the CENTCOM commander would go over, we had Sipper on the plane. We would be working on the plane, right? And so I'm like, okay, so when do we sleep, right? Just sort of lay down, sleep for 4 or 5 hours. We'd land in Iraq, and we were off. Like, we land about, 19, 20-hour flight. You hit the ground running with meetings. 1500, he's meeting with Iraq, the ambassador. Then we got to get all the country team briefing because he's having dinner with the Iraqi prime minister. He's got to be ready for me. I'm like, oh my God, when do we sleep? When do we eat? When do we, anything? And it was like, I think I was downing energy drinks, right? So I'm like, okay, 1800, we prepared all of his talking points before the event. We would write what happened during the meeting. We'd write up the things for after the meeting. I mean, it was a continuous cycle of just stuff. I'd never been prepared for something like that. And then when Colonel Bill Oslin left, because I had just promoted to colonel at the time, I was the acting director. So I went from, just doing a year at CENTCOM on plans that I'd never been trained on, to becoming the Commander's Action Group director temporarily for a couple months for the CENTCOM commander, right? So I was like, okay, this is amazing. I'm so uncomfortable right now that I don't know what I'm gonna do, right? So it was that uncomfortableness. And it was he's got these events coming up. We need a speech for these 3 things. Are you ready for that? Like, he's meeting with these people in Iraq. You're right, you give me that. He's meeting with these people in Oman, these people in Afghanistan, and we would have it by the 30-minute increments. Everything was prepared, and he's just an amazing leader. So it was amazing to see that in person, to be in the room when he was talking to the Sultan of Oman, the King of Jordan, the Prime Minister of Iraq, all these great leaders that, we're thought to think of as great leaders. And I just thought, there is something I could learn from this, and it's put yourself in, first of all, if you're feeling uncomfortable about the next step and you're not ready, good, take it. That's perfect. You're supposed to feel that way. Then it was, when you're in that position, ask good questions, ask, okay, what else could I learn from this? What can I learn from this meeting? And a lot of it obviously is just, interstate relations that matter to our country and United States standing in the Middle East and greater war, in Syria and against ISIS. And there's all that, but then there's all of the sort of the meta meaning, which is, okay, how does this Sultan of Oman interact with this general? How does this general, who's not been trained to be a foreign diplomat, how is he so good at this, right? How does he carry so much weight? And it was sort of those questions I was asking myself and learning just from having put myself initially in such an uncomfortable situation that I wanted just to learn and do something I didn't know, to finding myself in this position, and just taking away as much as I could from it. I remember and then at the end, the last sort of 4 to 5 months, I had been selected for brigade command, and I'd spent 4 to 5 months, before I transitioned to brigade command. I just remember everything I did, I started looking at it from a lens of, what could I take away from this for brigade command? What could I take away from this meeting for brigade command? So I just sort of kept asking myself those questions. And then same, what can I take away from this as a business person? And so I started asking myself that too, knowing that, I would make the transition back. And so it's sort of those, you're going to find yourself in situations like, oh, should I go for it? My feeling is, what do you have to lose, right? If you feel uncomfortable, it's scary, that's a good thing. Put yourself in that situation. Take advantage of those opportunities. And then when you're in it, it's, what questions are you asking? It should be good ones. It should be empowering ones that make you think through deliberately, you as a person, as a father, as a mother, as a leader of your organization, whether it's business or military, or as a leader in your community. And so I journaled so much during that time, just from all the takeaways of being, in some of these meetings, that I look back on some of that today. I'll sort of, check back on my black book and see what I wrote about this meeting and think, yeah, I remember this. And my takeaway, was this for my business, or was this for my military organization, my brigade. So that's, sort of one of the takeaways. You have stories, questions you ask yourself, and then just the challenge of putting yourself in a place that makes you feel uncomfortable, to challenge yourself.
Absolutely love that. Just, that's a whole, that experience alone from just as you shared there, there's that of the amount of lessons that you can pull out of the time that you deliberately and intentionally put yourself out of your comfort zone.
And let me not, I don't want to underemphasize all the mistakes I made, right? I don't want to paint like I was just miraculously so good. Look what happened, right? I made mistakes left and right. I'm just telling you. And so I was called out on them too, right? And so I made a ton of mistakes. And so the key was, though, to be like, okay, acknowledge. Yep, I made a mistake. I briefed this whole thing wrong. Got it. I'm going to correct it for next time, right? Put me in the ring again, right? Or same even for the commander. I mean, you can't mess up at that level, but I made some mistakes anyway. And, but you know what? I put myself out there, and it was just like, okay, I got it. That was a mistake. I'm gonna, continue moving forward. And the story I'm gonna tell myself isn't one of failure. The story I'm gonna tell myself is, I'm the one who put myself in the ring, and I boxed. I got my ass whipped. Doesn't matter. I'm still standing. I'm gonna keep going for the next round. And now I'm gonna focus on the next round, not just what happened. So that's definitely important to remember. Like I've made a lot of mistakes, and I think people shy away from that. Like, ooh, I don't want to fail. Actually, that's where you learn more is through failure.
Well, 100%. And I mean, so one of the things is, one of my philosophies, entrepreneurs view failure differently than everyone else does. Because as an entrepreneur in our house, we celebrate failure. Since our kid was probably 3 or 4, I ask her almost daily, how did you fail today? And if she doesn't have an answer, then we have to go fail at something, right? Because I want
That is such a good question. Right?
Because our American education system, an F is a bad thing. Oh, you're grounded. Oh, you can't do this or that. No, in an entrepreneurial world, we celebrate it, right? And we celebrate failure in our house. And so for that reason, who learned more, the observers in your life that were watching you fall on your face, or you did?
Right.
Sure.
Right.
Can they learn something from watching people that fall? Absolutely. But nobody learned more than the person that is going through those experiences. There's nothing like doing it yourself. And again, you reframed it for me, failure is a necessary part of the learning process. And another thing that we call it in our house is professor failure, right? What did you learn from professor failure today, right? So it's reframing it as a positive, not as a negative, right? It's something to be celebrated and learn from. Anyway.
Absolutely.
Another neat thing is it seems like you've reframed getting out of your comfort zone, which again, by definition, people don't like to do it because it's out of your comfort zone. But in my opinion, again, cheesy quote, but no growth happens in your comfort zone. You can't grow your muscles without breaking them down. There's that tension that has to occur in order for growth to happen in your life. But it's like, again, avoidance guy, oh, that's going to be painful. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be embarrassing or whatever. However, again, how do you define embarrassing? How do you define, there's so many things that go with your definitions, but it's getting out of your comfort zone. Like failure is a necessary part of the learning process and learning journey.
So true.
I just love hearing how you have either consciously or subconsciously defined. It's like if there's another thing too, one of my buddies, he was in CAG at the unit, and it's so funny the way he wasn't even aware of it, but he would run towards personal conflict, right? So anytime there was conflict, he sought it out. Even if it was his own conflict, it didn't matter. If he saw 2 people fighting, he would go get in the middle of it. What are you guys fighting about? I don't want to fight. You know what I mean? Or, he would just, anywhere there was conflict, he would seek it out. And it was so jarring to the people pleaser addict, right?
Oh, my goodness.
Who avoided
Oh my goodness, yeah.
the C word at all costs, right? Conflict.
You didn't want to name it.
That's right. I would run from it. And so, just for you that you run towards, again, adventure. You run towards growth and contribution. You run towards getting out of your comfort zone. You run towards failure. It's so neat, you know, just refreshing how you
run, sometimes unwillingly. Okay. So part of, I mean, it's uncomfortable, right? Failure. You know, what if I fail? What if I look like an idiot in front of everyone? Okay, sure. You know, and so you're right. And part of it's like, okay, do I really want to do this? Okay, why? And I always ask that basic question: is there growth here? And am I going to contribute to the organization, to society, to, you know, whatever it is? And so that's where I frame it. So you're right. I think you have to frame it that way.
Well, and again, I go to this too is, but what is failure though?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What is it?
Exactly.
How do you, right? Because I guarantee you, if you put
it's getting to yes faster. That's what it means.
Oh, see, I love that. That's great. I love that. Right. So if you ask 10 people, how do you define failure? I bet you'd come up with, you know, some pretty different answers there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think how we define failure is very, very important, because so many people, you know, based on the definition, allow themselves to create limiting beliefs to avoid failure. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yes.
So Rose,
I agree.
I've already taken a truckload of your time, and I'm so thankful that you have invested so much into, you know, me personally and the folks who are going to be watching this. I'm just so thankful for your time, your wisdom. Absolutely game changer. And I'm looking forward to continuing these conversations, you know, for sure.
I agree.
I
agree. And same. I want to interview you. Same way. And we're so like-minded in that, you know, we ask, well, why is it this way? And, you know, how can I learn more? And I agree with you. It's just, that's so good.
Thank you so much for your time and your
Same
wisdom.
Here.
Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Noble. I appreciate it.
360.